So back on side was Coxey.
Yeah.
Obviously David Cox was up at Peterhead. I think it was well publicised that I think that's maybe where his problems really came to a head, and I think Jim McInally, our manager, I think he's been on record as saying that Jim was really good for him, so kind of got to know Coxey through the Peterhead scene, and then speaking to him at certain events that I'd see him at, and I just think it's really good because I think it's such a big thing in football now, you know, when guys, especially I find when guys come for full-time football and they need to take that drop to part-time level. I mean, I've experienced it myself. It hits you like a ton of bricks, mate. You know, nothing gets you ready for that, because you play football your whole life. That's all you've done. And then it comes to it, you've got big mortgage payments because you're on a decent contract at, say, a Dundee where I was, and suddenly you're not getting that money anymore, and you've still got to keep the payments up, and you think, I've no qualifications, I've no experience in work, so where do I go? So you need somebody to talk to, but again, you're too proud to go and speak to people. But so it's great that back on side there's somebody that can be there for football players. You know, not once were we told or explained that, listen, there will come a stage in your career where you'll go from that money to that money and you'll need to go and work straight away. You know, everyone thinks football players that they can retire and sit in their house, but unless you're at the top clubs in England, you know, that's very rare for players. So as I say, there's no sort of direction for you, and you get let go for a club and you're basically on you go and get on with your life and go and trying to make the best of it. And as you say, usually your wife doesn't work as well, because maybe you've young kids and she's bringing up the kids while you're out working, so you're suddenly sitting and there's no wage coming in at all.
Yeah.
And as I say, it has you turn like a ton of bricks. I had to go and do the night shift in the Royal Mail, mate, and after playing for Dundee, good money, and I remember walking down to Springburn from my house because I couldn't drive either, and sitting thinking, what has happened to my life here? You know, and luckily open goal came along. But if you didn't get someone like that, then I can see why people 100%. I can see why they would struggle with everyday life. So because especially when we grew up, at the age that we grew up, nobody ever showed their feelings. You know, it was very much a ruthless dressing room where you get slaughtered every day. Whether it was what you're wearing, what your haircut was like, whether you had spots on your face, whether you smelled, you would be told. You know, and there was nobody, older players wise, that you could go and sit and say, by the way, I'm maybe not feeling great today, because you'd be told to get on with it. You know, that's just the way it was back then. So I totally get, and again, I think it's so much easier now with younger players coming through. I do think the older players are a lot more understanding, you know, with how younger players are feeling. So if we could get more people on side with that, in terms of, instead of maybe shouting at younger kids, maybe going asking them why they're struggling and why they're maybe not performing well. See, you know, just to ask questions all the time, just constantly asking these young kids questions, because if you can get them right mentally, you'll get the best out of them on the pitch. And I find that with our guys at Peterhead, you know, being a manager, a coach now, it's much more than just going out and putting a training session on and playing on a Saturday. You know, you really need to, it's a full-time job, you know, with these players, because as I say, so many of them have got so much going on in their lives that you need to make sure that their head's there right to play on a Saturday, first and foremost, before they go and play. Obviously, first and foremost, you'd give them advice. If they've asked me for my advice, I would give it, but then I would turn them on to people like back on side, which is great, because as I said, maybe 10 years ago there'd be nobody there for you, and it'd basically get on with it yourself. And it's probably why so many people are struggling now, especially the older guys coming at the end, because they've grew up in that environment, where I think we're back on side, we might not get that as many coming at the end of their careers because of stuff like this. You know, the 21, 22 year olds now, it'll stand them in better stead when they come to 30, 35, because of people like back on side, because us as coaches, older players, understand more about mental health now. Massive, absolutely massive. I mean, I think for me, it's probably the most important thing in football now, and it's what football needs the most, is someone to be there for these. I'm saying I got released at 27 and it hit me like a ton of bricks, so I can only imagine what it's like for a 17, 18, 19 year old getting released. You know, you've got this idea when you're 15, 16 that you're going to be this big football player, and within 2 years the dream's over, and that's very hard to take. As I say, when you've worked from the age of maybe 6 up to 17 wanting to be a football player, and you're suddenly told you're getting released, no teams want you, and you've not got that support network around you with a wife, somebody to talk to, you know. So having, as I said before, having back on side, it's such a valuable thing for me, especially younger players to have. And again, like the academy, you're still involved in, because you've been full time for maybe a couple of years, you're then going into something similar to a full time environment. So you know, it's nothing new to you. You're already in kind of that environment. You're going in, but the one thing you're getting is one-to-one help, not just in football, but again in life, preparing you for maybe you're not going to make it as a football player. Yeah. So yourselves will get them ready for that. And for me, for young people, that's so important. 100%. I always say I was the most. I think we were the most lucky group in Scottish football, that we had a guy in Tommy Burns who was basically like a counsellor. You know, Tommy Burns wasn't about making you a better football player. Of course, that was his job, but first and foremost, he wanted to make you a good person, so that if it didn't work for you in football, that you were ready to go and be in life, in terms of being sociable, in terms of speaking to people, in terms of how to respect people when you speak to them. And again, I can't speak for academies now because I don't know what goes on in there, but what he gave us is the reason why every single player that's played under him for me has went on had a career, but after it they'll also be successful, because he's taught us life skills. Now whether that's still in the game, I don't know, but if Back Onside could go in, because that's ultimately who shapes you. It's that between that age for me, 16 and 18, the way Tommy Burns shaped me is the way I am as a person. And I think if you can get them at that age through people like Back Onside and get these guys at 16 to 18, then it'll stay with them for the rest of their lives. You know, that just having that option of people being there to speak to. So if you come into my club and you say to me, anytime you need a hand, give us a phone. I mean, what a blessing for a kid, especially as well for a kid like me who moved away from Dundee. You know, you're sitting in digs all the time, it's hard. There'll be a lot of kids that are doing it. You know, they've moved away from home at a young age. They're in digs with maybe people that they didn't particularly get on with. What better to have guys like you that you could pick up the phone in and have a wee chat for 20-30 minutes every time you're feeling down. So again, I think it'll help players on the pitch massively, because as I've said before, I think if your head's right off the pitch, you perform a lot better on the pitch. So not only helping in terms of people's mentality, but also the game in general. I think this idea would help the kids not only off the pitch but on the pitch, and ultimately help us produce better players.